Like many a good millennial, I am always looking for a good TV show to binge for a couple of hours a night and try to forget about the rest of the adulting that I have to do in order to, live. Now, most of the time, it's nice, mindless entertainment like History's Forged in Fire. Trust me, that is some of the best background television you'll ever come across. But of late, there's another gift that has been bestowed upon those of us with a Hulu account. The original Law and Order. I'm flipping through the old episodes, particularly the episodes that came out in the early seasons, and I gotta say, when you get past some of the more uncomfortable aspects of the show, like the cops in the episodes from the late 90s and early 2000s are, shall we say, not the most enlightened in their conversations, it's really good television that makes you think. Not every case goes the way of the DA's office, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, and the people we follow are portrayed as flawed humans, and there's no easy answer to the question that any particular episode poses. Like, just because someone broke the law, does that mean that they're a bad person? And if they are guilty of something, is it the morally correct thing to put them away? What happens when the law brushes up against what's right, and what happens when the need for order results in stripping away the human aspect of a case? I'm not going to pretend to know all the answers here, and frankly I hope you haven't come to expect that on this show. I just know that this story is exactly the type of thing that Law & Order would cover, and just like the OG episodes, I imagine that there isn't going to be a clear-cut answer of what's right and what's wrong by the time we're done. Or perhaps there will be. I'm Mike GW, and you're listening to Surreal Sports Stories. When we last left off with the story of Plaxico Burress, he was up at the mountaintop. The 2007 NFL season had ended with his team, the New York Giants, not only making it to the playoffs, but also doing the seemingly impossible, defeating the previously unbeaten New England Patriots in the Super Bowl, with Burress himself catching what ended up being the game-winning touchdown for New York. He was making millions of dollars, the team was poised to go into the playoffs again the next year, and he was quarterback Eli Manning's star target. Things couldn't be better. Except maybe they could be. See, all through that championship season, Burress hadn't been practicing. That's not because he was choosing not to. It was because he literally couldn't. See, football isn't exactly easy on the body, and Burress's career was starting to wear on him. Extended ankle problems dogged him, and that kept him out of practice. But then, in the preseason of the 2008 campaign, as the Giants prepared to defend their title, Burress once again engaged in a time-honored tradition of his, sitting out of the preseason. This time, it was by choice. As he told the New Jersey Star-Ledger that June, quote, "Me and my agent have been trying to get a deal done so I can be a New York Giant for a long time. I personally don't like the way it's going. I'm not happy about it, and I'm going to choose not to participate." End quote. Now, Burress had signed a 6-year, $25 million deal when he had joined the team in 2005, and when he first joined the Giants, that seemed to make sense. By the letter of the contract, he was set to earn $10 million over the final 3 years of the deal, which averages out to a shade over $3 million a year. Let's be real, that's pretty good money. But Burress was staking his claim on the fact that he was one of the best receivers in the league, and looking back on it, he was, and it's not like he was out of pocket for demanding an extension or even a pay raise. His agent, Drew Rosenhaus, was also the agent for the top receiver and certainly the most flamboyant in the NFL at the time in Terrell Owens, and he had gotten an extension for more money for Owens that offseason. But according to the Star-Ledger, quote, "It appears that the contract that piqued Burress's interest was the 6-year, $55 million deal that free agent Javon Walker got with the Raiders this offseason after only playing 8 games due to injury." End quote. Considering Burress had played the entire previous year on a bad leg, he'd racked up over 1,000 yards receiving and caught the game-winning touchdown in the Super Bowl, I can understand him being a little bit annoyed that someone who'd been put in half a year would be making almost double what he was making. But alas for Burress, Giants general manager Jerry Reese was unmoved. Eventually, Burress would make it to the team's training camp in July, but he practiced very little with the team during that time. Very much a "I'm just here so I don't get fined" appearance, according to some. Burress insisted that, quote, "if it was only about my contract, I would be home in South Florida relaxing," end quote, and Giants head coach Tom Coughlin ran cover by stating that Burress's ankle was so bad that, quote, he has a situation where he absolutely has to wear orthotics, end quote, it still wasn't a great look. Now, despite all of this, Burress would eventually get his new deal, a multi-year contract worth an additional $35 million, and the Giants would start off the 2008 season with 3 straight wins. But then, in September, Burress was suspended by the team for 1 game for a violation of team rules. Now, I'm a little fuzzy on what the whole team rules thing would be, but when you no-show work on a Monday and then ghost the organization for 2 days despite them trying to call you, well, that's not exactly the most sporting behavior. Despite that, his agent Drew Rosenhaus remarked to the New York Daily News, quote, I think he was very surprised and very, very disappointed. He certainly did not anticipate that his conduct would lead to him being suspended, end quote. All I am going to say in response to that is that Drew Rosenhaus might have spent so much time around other high-profile, possibly immune-to-consequence athletes that his sense of moral clarity might be slightly askew. But I digress. Now, despite Burress's troubles, and the fact that he also was apparently having troubles at home with his wife Tiffany, the Giants were soaring. Through the first 11 games of the season, they were 10-1, sitting on top of the NFL. Compared to the previous season where the team had gone 10-6 and has squeaked into the playoffs, the jump from year to year was insane. As former Giant defensive end Justin Tuck remembered, quote, it would be like in college if you had all sophomores and juniors and they all came back and you had all juniors and seniors that next year. That's what it felt like. It felt like that team had gelled and that team had chemistry. We just found ways to win football games, end quote. So maybe Plaxico and the rest of the team could pretend that there was nothing wrong, that these issues that plagued the receiver and the team were just hiccups and not the rumblings of a growing storm in the distance. And maybe that's why, on the night of November 28, 2008, Plaxico Burress and a few friends went out to Lexington Avenue in New York City and hit up the nightclub LQ. I'll let Burress tell it. As he wrote years later in an article for the Players Tribune, quote, you know how when you leave your house you have like a checklist? You check your pockets like phone, wallet, keys, okay, I'm good. And if you leave your wallet or your phone at home, you feel kind of naked because you're so used to having it on you? It's a part of you, end quote. Trust me, Plax, I've been there. I am constantly checking to see if I have my keys, my phone, and my wallet before I leave for the day to go to work or just leave the house. It's definitely a little ritual that all of us, regardless of how rich and famous we are, can relate to. But it's here where things take a turn. Because Plax wasn't just talking about his phone, his wallets, or his keys. He was also talking about his gun. Now, it's not so much that Burress expected to get jumped or something like that. Frankly, he'd owned a gun since his rookie year with the Steelers back in 2000. And given his background growing up in Virginia Beach, I'm not going to be so quick to judge him in deciding to think about protecting himself. I sure as hell didn't grow up in the projects the way he did. That sort of thing is going to change you. But of course, bringing a gun, loaded or not, to a nightclub isn't exactly the most chill of things. But even then, he had a chill reception. It didn't seem to be an issue. As he wrote in the Players Tribune, quote, when we got to the club, I got patted down at the door and the security guard lifted my shirt up and saw my gun tucked into my belt. He was like, okay, if you're going to carry a gun, we got to be with you the whole night. I said, all right, cool. So they let me through the metal detector and into the club, end quote. I'm feeling a little tense in reading this, but that's because I don't use guns myself and I'm not really a fan. But I do suppose this is an acceptable workaround. Plax is already a high-profile figure, so someone might want to get close. With a bunch of scary security around him, I don't know what they look like, I'm just going to assume they tried to look scary. This is probably the best way to prevent someone getting hurt. Kind of skirting the rules, but I don't have a problem with it. But, see, it was a weekend night. That meant that LQ was packed. So much so that Burress remembered standing at the bar with a friend for only about a few minutes and noting that the place was stuffed wall to wall. Now, the security guard with them gets the MVP award for being the chillest and most reasonable person here because he looked around, saw the potential for disaster because, again, Plax has a loaded gun on him, and told him and his friends, why don't we just get you all upstairs? There's tables, they could chill, and it wouldn't be as nutty as it was on the main floor. So as Plaxico and his friends made their way up the stairs to the second floor of LQ, it was a dark and narrow hallway. You and I know the type. It's the bare minimum to avoid a fire code hazard, and it's also kind of hard to judge where exactly you're supposed to put your feet on the stairs. That's when you're sober, much less when you're not. And the music was loud. And as he was walking up the stairs, Plaxico Burress's foot missed a step. We've all been there, right? You miss a step, you kind of jar yourself, you look around, hope that nobody saw it. Yeah, well, that's the usual. Here's what's different. Plax had a gun. And where do you think he was keeping it? He wasn't Dr. King Schultz from the movie Django Unchained hiding it up his sleeve on a mechanical engineered marvel. He had the gun hooked to his belt. It's unclear if he even had a proper holster for the thing. And in that moment, he felt the gun begin to slip. As he remembered, quote, "My gun came unhooked from my belt and went sliding right down my right pant leg. My instant reaction was to catch it before it hit the floor, and I reached down with my right hand to grab it. And I guess my finger hit right on the trigger because it went off." End quote. That's basically the worst case scenario, right? And it wasn't like Burress was mistaking things. He saw the muzzle flash through his jeans. He knew the weapon had fired. But as he looked around, it appeared to be the greatest stroke of luck on the planet. There was no screaming, no mayhem, no indication that anyone had been hit by the bullet. Everyone else in the club was still dancing the night away. In fact, it didn't appear clear if anyone else in the building even knew that a gun had been fired. Burress, whose first thought had been, "Oh shit, I hope I didn't hit anybody," briefly relaxed. This was a terribly stupid moment, but so far it appeared to be a terribly lucky and, more importantly, victimless moment. And then he looked down. As he remembered, quote, "My jeans started to feel wet, so I looked back down at my leg. I was wearing a pair of Converse Chuck Taylors, and the toe was completely red, covered in blood. The bullet had gone through the skin and some muscle on my right thigh. It came out without hitting any arteries or bone, but there was a lot of blood. I turned back to one of my teammates and said, 'We need to go to the hospital.' 'Why?' 'I just shot myself.' He kind of blew me off like I was messing with him. Then he looked down at my leg and his eyes got real wide. 'Oh shit.' And then we left." End quote. Now, luckily for Burress, getting to the hospital quickly was the right thing to do. In a statement released by Pat Hanlon, the Giants' vice president for communications after everything blew up, quote, "Obviously our primary concern is for Plaxico's health and well-being, and given the circumstances, we are relieved to say he was released from a New York City hospital at approximately 2 p.m. today." End quote. That was a little bit after, the day after he got shot apparently. And it was from a New York Times article published the day after he shot himself. But in reading the rest of the article, the warning signs were there that this might not be a one-and-done moment of stupidity. The article mentioned that the Giants and the NFL were in discussions to determine the facts of the case and see if Burress had violated the league's personal conduct policy. And of course, the money line came from the Giants. Quote, "This incident could become a matter for law enforcement officials, and because of that, we have no comment on any of the details." End quote. That is code for, if anybody doesn't have a lawyer in this situation, they are some fools. Because it turns out the cops were digging into the case basically immediately. First, they went to the hospital about the event. Then afterwards, they followed up at the Burress home, where they attempted to interview him there. However, a woman who identified herself as Burress's wife, that would be Tiffany for those who've been keeping up, told the police, "You cannot talk to my husband," and "You can't come in." I should note that Mrs. Burress is an attorney. She clearly knows a thing or two about warrants and how to play the game of law. Now, remember when I told you at the beginning of this story, back in part 1, that folks around this time came to view NFL wide receivers of this era as a bunch of spoiled divas who are divorced from reality and consequence? Well, that's going to start rearing its ugly head here, because the New York Times started to let that bleed into their ostensibly objective write-up, remarking, quote, "The Giants and head coach Coughlin, not known for his tolerance of players who attract negative attention, have handled Burress with unusual patience." End quote. I know that trick, because I've engaged in it plenty of times when writing college papers or even in my high school newspaper. It might not seem like much, but that phrase, unusual patience, is a journalist's objective way of saying, this guy's a nuthead, but for some reason the team keeps protecting him. Others, however, are going to be less reserved in their judgment. Bob Glauber wrote a column for Newsday with the headline, "Good Riddance Plaxico," and snarked, quote, "This team has always been about the whole being greater than the sum of its parts, and Burress's absence will test that maxim. And even if the Giants don't end up achieving their goal of a rare Super Bowl repeat, they are a far better team without Burress. End quote. Some were more snarky than they were judgmental, like Harvey Arreton in the New York Times writing, quote, I can't help but wonder why a man would work so hard to self-destruct at the pinnacle of success and with the financial reward that goes with it. Happiness, it seems, was not the money after all, but a warm gun. End quote. And then some were just ridiculous, like Mike Lupica of the Daily News writing, quote, the gun didn't even do this to him. He did it to himself. End quote. I am willing to grant that Burress's own actions led to that moment, because they did, but until humans can shoot bullets themselves through sheer force of will, I am going to say that, yes, the gun did in fact do this to him. Now, all three of those write-ups come in the immediate aftermath as the investigation deepens and the crap hits the fan. And because this happened in New York, you can imagine that the headlines were equally wild. The New York Post had one headline screamed, Plaxed, with the emphasis on axed. Another from the New York Daily News called it the 27 million bullet. And Newsday had a headline, Out Pattern, which is a bit of a thinker when it comes to football references, and I think they should have put that one back to the drawing board, but whatever. I also found some articles on Bleacher Report that were written by contributors to the website that are so mean that they border on being racist. So for the sake of keeping the narrative moving, I'm not even bothering to cite or quote from them. Basically, everyone was dunking on Plaxico Burress, calling him an idiot, calling him a malcontent. This was everything that anyone who has ever hated an NFL wide receiver for getting away with nonsense could have dreamed of. Not only did this man do something dumb, he did it to himself, no one else was hurt, and then essentially gave the public moral license to dunk on him for eternity. Now, as all this was going on, what was Plaxico up to? Honestly, he was just chilling and recovering at home, thinking that it would all blow over. Which is arguably the smart thing to do, but there were some problems that he had not taken into account. As he wrote years later in the Players' Tribune, quote, I figured I had permits and all that. Plus, I hadn't hurt anybody but myself. I didn't think there was anything to really punish me for. But there were a few things I didn't know that I should have. My gun had been registered in Florida, where I had a house at the time, but the registration had expired. It wasn't registered at all in New York, so my gun wasn't as legal as I thought it was. Also, I didn't know that there was a state law in New York that called for mandatory jail time for carrying a loaded handgun without a valid New York license. End quote. I have family members that have gotten their FOID card and other certifications to carry firearms, and they have had to reapply for their permits. Let me tell you something. You really don't want to mess around with that or string the state along. It tends to go poorly for you. Because of this, on November 30th, 2 days after the event, Plaxico Burress surrendered to the New York State Police and was arrested for criminal possession of a handgun. That's something that carries with it a serious possibility of prison time, much less fines and other punishments. And yet, in spite of this all, Burress was the definition of the phrase, ignorance is bliss. As he wrote in the Players' Tribune, quote, but even with all that in mind, a little part of me still thought, I'm good. I'm Plaxico Burress. I'm an NFL player, a Super Bowl hero. It's not like they're going to throw me in jail, right? Then, when I came out of my arraignment hearing, my attorney looked at me and said, we got a problem. Mayor Bloomberg just went on TV and said you should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And I swear I said, who's Mayor Bloomberg? That's how little I knew about everything that was going on. End quote. Mayor Bloomberg was then mayor of New York City and billionaire founder of Bloomberg News and Bloomberg Terminals, Michael Bloomberg. And he was heated about this whole affair. On the morning of December 1st, 2008, he went in front of cameras and laid out a scathing indictment of the process around Plaxico's arrest and charge. In particular, Bloomberg had his harshest words for New York Presbyterian Hospital, where Burress had been treated. See, it was a New York law that any time a gunshot victim is admitted to a hospital, the hospital is legally required to notify the authorities. Well, guess what New York Presbyterian did not do in this case? As Bloomberg remarked, quote, I think that the district attorney should certainly go after the management of this hospital. The lame excuse that they didn't know, this is a world-class hospital in a city where we all know what goes on in the streets of our city, and we should all be working together to get guns off our streets. There's a reason why hospitals are required by law to immediately call the police department. They didn't, and they should make sure that the people who didn't no longer work there, and I would question why the management didn't have training in place and didn't discipline them immediately. It's just an outrage, end quote. Oh, don't worry, my friends, he's just getting started. Bloomberg then turned his ire towards the idea that this was an NFL player and that he should skirt New York's gun laws because of it. He remarked, quote, "Our children are getting killed with guns in the street. Our police are getting killed. That's why the state legislature passed the automatic sense that if you get caught with an illegal gun, I think it would be an outrage if we didn't prosecute to the fullest extent of the law, particularly people who live in the public domain. If we didn't prosecute to the fullest extent, then I don't know who on earth you would," end quote. Now, if he seems extremely invested in this, Michael Bloomberg wasn't just being a zealous politician. For what it's worth, being against illegal guns was a passion project of his. So much so that in 2006, during his mayorship, he founded the nonprofit Mayors Against Illegal Guns, which eventually merged with other similar organizations to form Everytown for Gun Safety, which is one of the largest gun safety nonprofits in America. Now, I should also point out that Bloomberg's, shall we say, zealous nature about this case was very controversial, and he was criticized for so passionately getting involved in a case. Sports writer Gemma Hill pointed out that no matter one's perspective, the simple reality was that, quote, Bloomberg's words guarantee Burress will be treated more harshly in court, and no matter what your opinion is of Burress, he's entitled to a fair trial, the same as the rest of us, end quote. And I gotta agree with Gemma there. I understand passion, but in a system where the rule of law matters, Mayor Bloomberg basically poisoned the entire well. And as it was, if Plaxico Burress was convicted, this crime carried with it a mandatory minimum of 3.5 years in prison. It's one thing when you got small potatoes folk calling for your prosecution, but when the mayor of one of the most visible cities in the world is calling for your head, well, then you're probably up the creek. The Giants would suspend Burress for the remainder of the season. He tussled with them over whether or not he should be paid his bonus. He eventually won an arbitration, but honestly, such a victory was a thin gruel. In August of 2009, after wrangling with the legal system for a bit, Burress pled guilty to gun possession charges. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison. And just like that, one of the brightest careers in the NFL came to a screeching halt. As he wrote in the Players' Tribune, quote, "I went from being an NFL superstar to basically being put in a cage for 17 hours a day. I cried so many nights that I lost count. I thought about all the playground legends from my hood who were better athletes than me, but they stayed in the hood doing the same things they had always done, smoking the same things they had always smoked, and getting caught up in that life. But not me. I got out. I earned my way out. I had worked my whole life to get to where I was, and I threw it all away with one stupid decision. Now I was serving food in the prison cafeteria, mopping floors, and cleaning toilets." End quote. After a lifetime of getting through everything on the strength of his ability and fame as a player, Plaxico Burress came up against something that even his fame as an athlete could not save him from. Quite literally, the only person he hurt in his fall from grace was himself. Now, I've quoted a lot from Plaxico Burress's write-up from the Players' Tribune, and I should note that it comes a decade after the event, long after he was released from prison. I've read the whole thing with a very critical eye, and I gotta say, it's a pretty damn remorseful and reflective piece. Because while Burress was in prison, he missed time with his wife and his kids. He even missed the birth of his daughter, as he was locked up when his wife Tiffany gave birth. If it was me, thinking about missing such a pivotal and crucial moment for my wife and my child solely because of a dumb decision that I had made, it would have destroyed me. And it's clear that it damn near destroyed Plaxico. As he remarked in his piece, don't expect somebody to teach you when it comes to the rules of life. He remarked that he should have known the New York gun laws. He should have known not to bring his gun. He should have known better. But he knows that he made that choice. I imagine part of what made him so reflective was another set of betrayals. See, Plax had been raised to believe that family was everything. And when he was a player, he made sure to reach out to and take care of family members with his riches and his influence. But when he was in prison, Plax commented bitterly, quote, "I served 22 months, and some of the same family members whose bills I had been paying for years never even came to visit me. It wasn't until about 60 or 90 days before I got out that I started getting letters from them, asking if they could come to some games when I got back into the league. I was like, no effing way, you ain't coming to nothing. And when I got out, I stopped paying their bills. I went my separate way. To this day, I haven't even talked to them. It's sad that some members of my family are no longer in my life, but I had to ask myself that difficult question. Would they be there for me if I was broke or if I wasn't in the NFL? And they had proven to me that they wouldn't be. End quote. Now, some of Plax's friends from the hood, they did show up for him. His family, like his wife, showed up for him. So he wasn't alone. But as he put it, quote, I basically lost everything, all because of one stupid decision. On June 6, 2011, Plaxico Burress was released from protective custody out of the Oneida Correctional Facility, which is not a great look to name a prison after a native tribe, but whatever. He had served 20 months. He tried to get back into the NFL, signing first with the New York Jets and then with the Pittsburgh Steelers, but the 2 years in the clink were simply too much time away from the game. Burress was cooked, and the game had passed him by. He would retire roughly 2 years after he was released from prison. Now, Burress's article, like I said, in the Players Tribune was a decade after the incident, so I wanted to find some sources that were more close to the moment of his shooting, because time does match to give us some clarity and perspective. I found a September 2011 article from ESPN.com that references Plaxico's first major interview after prison. Talking to Men's Journal, Burress recounted the stress that his prison stay put on his marriage. Quote, I told her stop sending pictures because they eat me up so much. Me and her were arguing on the phone each day because I was locked down in a lot of pain, and she's in pain about her life outside, being alone with a kid, and 7 months pregnant. End quote. In addition, Burress dealt with prison guards who were, shall we say, enthusiastic. Quote, they treated me like an effing axe murderer. 23-hour lockdown, non-contact visiting, and only a Bible to read. Nobody deserves to live like that, man. Then at chow, these white officers were yelling, you black mother effer, you stupid effing dumbass, you're finished. It was the lowest point ever in my life. End quote. He also got hate mail. Quote, I was a human pincushion. They were like, yeah, we finally got you, mother effer. End quote. And the press was seemingly gleeful in his downfall. Quote, on the cover of the New York Post, it said, giant idiot. And I'm thinking, damn, I went and gave them what they wanted. I'm just another gun-toting famous black athlete. End quote. In the years that have passed, Plaxico Burress has kept a low profile. He's spoken at the NFL Rookie Symposium about avoiding being an idiot and learning to take some responsibility with their lives, and he accepts, if not necessarily is at peace with, the fact that he will forever be known as the NFL player that shot himself in the leg with his own gun. It's certainly a thought that tickles the funny bone as you resist the urge to chuckle or smirk at his expense. Because it kind of brings up thoughts of Eminem's movie 8 Mile, and in particular some of the lines from his final rap. Quote, I do got a dumbass friend named Cheddar Bob who shoots himself in his leg with his own gun. End quote. But then, shortly after that, Eminem says another line that I think is more appropriate here. Quote, don't ever try to judge me, dude. You don't know what the fuck I've been through. End quote. I've been thinking about judgment a lot whilst writing and researching this story, and about Law and Order. What is the limit of our judgment? Does it end when the person who committed a crime has served their time in prison? In theory and on paper, yes, but let's be real. We hold judgment against people long after they have served their time to society, and especially in consideration for their crime, whatever it may be. And yet at the same time, if someone has committed a terrible crime, has shown true and complete contrition for their actions, and then takes steps to make things better, well, I won't immediately say that we should forgive them. The victims of a crime might have something to say about that after all. But perhaps there comes a time where we need to stop actively condemning them. Here's a guy that came from nothing. He scrabbled his way up to something. He was certainly enabled and he was certainly coddled, but that doesn't make him any different from any other athlete. And then at the peak of his fame and fortune, he did the dumbest thing imaginable and cost himself basically everything. No one outside of his sphere was hurt lastingly other than him and his immediate sphere and family. Even the folks who were the victims of his financial stupidity early in his career felt he wasn't malicious, just a kid who was immature and didn't know any better. He went to prison as a direct result of his actions, and he came out of it remorseful, appreciative of what he had, understanding of what he lost, and introspective about the future. If that's not grounds for us all letting it go, I don't know what is. At this point, anyone that's mocking him for doing such a dumb thing probably needs to move on. Moving on or not, though, the sheer insanity of that situation does make it pretty surreal. One last sidebar. These days, Plaxico Burress keeps a low profile, yes, but that doesn't mean that the game of football has left him entirely. or his family. In the spring of 2024, his young son Elijah, not so young anymore, announced his intent to go to college. Makes sense, he was a senior in high school and that's sort of the thing that we expect. Except the son was a carbon copy of the father, in that he was damn good at football. So good, in fact, that Elijah Burress committed to play football in the fall of 2025 for the University of Notre Dame Fighting Irish. And the number that he claimed for the next step in his career? Number 17. Just like his old man. You've been listening to Surreal Sports Stories. Sources for these episodes include ESPN.com, the New York Daily News, the Players Tribune, the New Jersey Daily Register, the Los Angeles Times, and many more. If you like the show, you can find Surreal Sports Stories wherever you listen to your podcasts. We upload on Wednesdays. And now you can find us on YouTube. Video forms of the podcast can be found on the Surreal Sports Pod YouTube channel. That's at Surreal Sports Pod. And you can expect uploads of the new episodes the day before they drop on audio. So if you want an early peek at the stuff coming down the pike, do us a favor and smash that subscribe button and leave a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcasts. We'll also be uploading the archive of old episodes onto YouTube over time with audio cleanups and adjustment to make the pivot to video even cleaner. We're going to take a little bit of a break over the summer to recharge and refuel, and then we're going to come out swinging again with episodes this September. If you want to stay engaged during the break, check out the Surreal Sports Pod Instagram account and YouTube channel. Both are linked in the bio for this episode to stay engaged. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time. This has been Surreal Sports Stories. You've been amazing, and I've been Mike GW. Stay steady, y'all.